Tonight on Primetime Politics, controversial support.
Will the Prime Minister explain to Canadians why he betrayed his commitment and now supports a war he knows is illegal?
The support is not a blank check.
The Prime Minister faces his critics for the first time since declaring support for U.S. military action in Iran. Coming up, we'll speak to two opposition MPs about their concerns, one who supports Carney's initial statement, the other who is worried about a violation of international law. Also, what is the argument for supporting military strikes against the Iranian regime? We'll speak to lawyer and human rights activist Kaveh Shahrooz. And Liberals find new support in Alberta. We'll examine what that might mean for the next federal election. This is Primetime Politics. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. We'll get to those stories in a moment, but we do want to begin right now with a developing story out of Toronto, where earlier today shots were fired at the U.S. consulate. Now, police say two men got out of a white Honda CR-V around 4:30 a.m. this morning, and using a handgun, they fired multiple shots at the diplomatic complex located less than a block away from City Hall in downtown Toronto. The RCMP are treating the shooting as a national security incident, and while they say it is too early to link the event to the conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran, patrols are being stepped up around the U.S. and Israeli consulates in Toronto and the U.S. Embassy here in Ottawa. Now, the Ontario Premier, he is condemning the incident, and as for Mark Carney, here is what we heard today from the Prime Minister.
Extremely concerning. We convened the incident response group on the weekend because of the situation in Iran, but also to ensure that all forces and resources of the federal government are cooperating with local police and provincial police, obviously with respect to the shootings at the synagogues. I have had conversations with members of the Jewish community. We're coordinating, as you saw from the RCMP deeming the shooting at the U.S. consulate a national security incident, and we'll use the full weight of resources and ensure that the perpetrators feel the full weight of justice.
And late this afternoon, we also got this statement from the U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra. Mr. Hoekstra saying, "This morning's attack on our Consulate General in Toronto is deeply troubling. I'm very grateful that no one was hurt. My team is in close contact with Toronto Police and Canadian authorities, and we have full confidence in their investigation." The ambassador goes on to say, "Our work continues. We will not be intimidated." Now, of course, we will continue to follow that story, but right now let's switch our attentions to the House of Commons, where debate today about the Iranian conflict led question period. There are still many questions about the Prime Minister's support of U.S. military action, though the Conservative leader focused in on members of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps that several legal groups say have members right here in Canada. This despite the fact that the IRGC is designated a terrorist entity by the Canadian government.
Our synagogues are being shot. Iranian dissidents killed on our streets, and there are 700 IRGC terrorist agents on our streets. What will the Prime Minister do to restore the safety that Canadians had before his Liberal government took office?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we got to go quick here. C-14 changes the bail laws. He might want to read it, definitely wants to support it. That member opposite has voted against every single gun control measure ever put before this House. This government has banned the Islamic Guard. This government's sanctioned over 200 individuals, over 200 Iranian entities. This government is investigating over 17,000 individual cases. We are protecting this country with 1,000 more RCMP, 1,000 more voters.
The Prime Minister and before him the Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Now, what you just saw there was the first time that the two have been able to debate Iran in the House, and that's because the Prime Minister did not attend yesterday, nor did Mr. Carney take part in the Take Note debate that was held last night. And to talk about this, we're now joined by Shuvaloy Majumdar, the Conservative MP for the riding of Calgary Heritage. Mr. Majumdar, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks for having me.
So, yeah, as I said, the Prime Minister was not there in the House yesterday, nor was he at the take-home debate last night. How useful was that discussion if Mr. Carney is not in attendance?
Listen, the conversation in Parliament is essential. It's part of our democracy. It's how we work our way through big, heavy issues like the ones that we're talking about today. The take-note debate on Iran is a critical moment in world history, let alone critical events of our times. The fact the Prime Minister was only 15 minutes away, I mean, his RCMP detail could have made sure he could have done his community event and shown up in Parliament to present to Canadians his perspective of what Canada should be doing through this crisis. Was evidently available to him, but he chose against it. He chose against it perhaps because he's taken 4 different opinions over the course of 4 days and hasn't quite settled in his own mind about what he wants Canada to do through this period of time.
Mm-hmm. What do you make of the position? Because we saw Mr. Carney in the initial hours after the first strike say that he supported the U.S. action against Iran. He then adds to it amendments that includes a statement about regret. What do you take from what you've heard from Mr. Carney on the issue?
Listen, that first statement he put out was well received by the entire country, I think by our friends, our partners, our allies. I think it was a right position to take for Canada, and the Prime Minister did, I think, a good job by describing that right out of the gate with the kind of clarity he provided. Yet, to see him turn it back within a day and take 3 different positions afterward is beyond something I can explain. I wish the Prime Minister pursued consistency on this in the actions that our allies are taking in our self-defense.
Mm-hmm. Well, there have been questions raised about international law, the lack of observance of international law with this strike against Iran. Does your party not have any concerns about that?
Look, this is an incredibly important debate. The Prime Minister in Davos got up and said that the rules-based international order no longer matters, that we should take the sign out of the window and get on with the fact that the world is different. Yet now, in the last week, he's saying, well, the international system, the rules-based system, is one worth defending. He's taking 2 different positions off of a seminal speech that he gave at Davos just a very short while ago. My view is that this is an intervention in the self-defense of the Western world. The Iranian regime must be confronted for its brutal repression of its people. Tens of thousands of Iranians have paid the price since the January 8th and 9th uprisings. You've had a regime that is obsessed with sowing chaos and terrorism across the region. There would be no Houthis, no Hezbollah, no Hamas, no Iraqi Shia militia were it not for the investment of time, capital, training, and weapons to these organizations by Iran. And more dangerously, a fanatical regime that would be able to achieve nuclear capability. And I'm not just talking about being able to create the weapons, the nuclear material. I'm talking about the payload of the weapons that are used to deliver them, the ballistic missile capacity. If the regime itself had accomplished a nuclear weapons protection for its own longevity, it would have been a disaster for the world.
Are you concerned, though, that the United States does not seem to have a clear end game in sight and that Canada, in giving support, might be entwining itself into something greater?
I think it's important to understand that the operational cadence of what our allies have presented to the region is to defang the regime of its nuclear capabilities, its ballistic missiles, and its ballistic capabilities and drone capabilities, and to deny it its capacity to foment terrorism across the region. Unpredictability in war is an unfortunate part of the reality of it. You don't necessarily want to telegraph to your rivals what you want to be doing. I spent 5 years in Iraq and Afghanistan from 2006 to 10, and can tell you that there are a lot of errors that have been made along the way through adventurism in the Middle East, and I don't think any party wants to replicate that.
Shuvaloy Majumdar, this just begins the debate on this issue as the war is far from over. But for this evening, thank you for the time.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
And you. Okay, well, with that, let's now reach out to Alexandre Boulerice, the NDP Member of Parliament for Rosemont-la-Petite-Prairie in Quebec. Mr. Boulerice, thank you for the time this evening.
My pleasure.
Listen, I started my last interview with this question. I'll ask it of you. How useful was last night's debate if the Prime Minister did not attend?
I think it's a content of Parliament. You know, this is a really serious and dangerous situation with an American president that is unpredictable, and a lot of consequence not only for the region and the stability or the chaos of the region, but also for everyone with price of food or gas that will come up. And liberals, Carney liberals are really difficult to follow with their statements recently.
Difficult to follow those statements. What have you found troubling about it most of all?
But you know what? First reaction is that we support the intervention of Netanyahu and Trump against the regime in Iran. After that, say we support with regret. After that is we support international law, even though it was not respected. So what is exactly the position of Canada? You know, Spain took a really courageous and firm the position, and right now Mr. Carney and the Liberals are a little bit everywhere. If you are serious with the respect of international law, you have to go through the process of the United Nations, and it's clearly not the case.
Clearly not the case, although there will be those that will make the argument that to get rid of such a troubling regime was, at the end of the day, not bad for the world's security.
To get rid of the Mullah's regime is a good thing, but it must come from the Iranian population. Otherwise, if it's only the rule of who has the more weapons and bombs, the world will be in a constant chaos, because we cannot just bomb regimes we disagree with, even though that was a really bloody regime, and we saw it recently with probably tens of thousands of civil Iranians being massacred by their own government. But you cannot jump into that kind of adventure and think that there will be no consequences. If we are serious about multilateralism and international law, we have to go through the process of United Nations.
Now, the fighting in Iran is obviously not over. We have no idea when it will end. Will there be another push from New Democrats to have another special debate, whether that's a take-note debate or an actual emergency debate? Will there be another push from your party to get a discussion going on Iran?
Yeah, we will continue to bring this important issue. Our interim leader, Don Davis, asked a question to the government during QP today, and it concerns a lot of persons. I was meeting today in Ottawa with teenagers from a high school in Montreal, and a lot of questions were about Iran. People are afraid; they don't know what will go on, and if there will be an escalation in this war. It was an adventure that is, really dangerous to put all this region into a really bad chaos.
Alexandre Boulerice, thank you for this. I appreciate the time this evening.
No problem. Have a good one.
You too. And a quick note, we did invite the Liberals to provide someone for the program this evening, but as you can see, they did not. But we do want to continue the conversation right now, and we are reaching out to Kaveh Shahrooz. He is a former human rights advisor to Global Affairs Canada, a lawyer by training. He is a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Kaveh Shahrooz, thank you for the time this evening.
Very good to be with you.
So as we heard from our last two guests, the Prime Minister has been criticized for supporting the U.S. strike on Iran and doing so within hours. But you, based on what I've read, seem to see the logic in the declaration that Mr. Carney made more than a week ago at this point. And you've said that you actually support what he had to say. Why is that?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I supported Prime Minister Carney's original statement. Since then, there seems to have been several different positions put forth, which I'm left a little bit unclear on. But going back to his original statement in which he stated support for the U.S. involvement, my support for his position is that I think the U.S. and Israel are acting to prevent a nuclear war. The Iranian regime is a regime that cannot be trusted with nuclear weapons. It is a regime that has shown time and again that it is happy to engage in terrorism, that it is happy to encroach in foreign territory, to carry out killings on foreign soil, to fund terrorist organizations, and to have proxies carry out attacks in other countries. And it has also shown that it's not a good faith diplomatic partner, that it really tends to respond only to force and not to conversation. And so for all these reasons, I think the United States and Israel really had no choice, especially in light of the brutality of the regime in early January. And I think it's really only fair in those circumstances for the international community to support this military action against Iran's regime and in solidarity with Iran's people.
Well, I was speaking with Lloyd Axworthy earlier this week, of course, former Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Chrétien government. And, he pointed out that Canada relies on international law to protect its sovereignty as a country. And this strike against Iran does violate international law. Is that not a dangerous precedent then to support something that violates international law?
Well, yes, I think, obviously we have an international legal system in place to prevent unprovoked use of, military action and unprovoked war. But at the same time, an international legal system is not a suicide pact. It is not a system designed to allow rogue states like Iran's regime to acquire nuclear weapons. And I think Mr. Axworthy's position would ultimately leave us in that position where we couldn't take action until it was too late for us to take action. I think there is a basis to act. And I think, again, responsibility to protect. Like, I don't want to focus solely on the nuclear issue. I think what we saw in early January, where in the span of about 2 days, Iran's regime killed thousands upon thousands of people. I think there is a responsibility to protect for the international community to get involved and to ensure that a regime that controls a country like Iran does not get to carry out such a massacre again.
Mm-hmm. I hear what you're saying, but when you look at the statements being said by the U.S. White House and by military leaders, there doesn't seem to be a clear end game vis-a-vis Iran when it comes to the United States. Is that at all concerning?
That's certainly concerning. I mean, I'm hard pressed to defend the Trump administration generally, and I think what we're seeing in this case, even though I, trust the general or support the general thrust of their action, I think they've gone about it in quite a shambolic way. I think they haven't really been very clear about what their end goal is. Frankly, I think in ensuring that Iran doesn't get nuclear weapons and protecting Iran's people, which really can only be done through a change in regime in Iran. Those are worthy goals, and those are goals that can be defended. Regrettably, the Trump administration has sort of shifted the goalposts at pretty much every day, so it's a little bit unclear sort of what they're after.
So what is the advice then to the Canadian government? Because if the goalposts, as you say, have been shifted, and if the situation, as you say, is shambolic, what is the clear path for the government then in terms of the level of support it can give to this operation? Is it the level of support only the initial strike and it ends there? Where do you see this going? What would you say?
I think there are a few different parts to this. So first of all, we should generally support this military action, but our support should not be unconditional. It's not a blank check. We should support the United States insofar as they are pursuing certain clear ends. And I think those justifiable ends, as I mentioned, are ensuring that Iran doesn't get nuclear weapons or ballistic missiles, and ensuring that Iran's people are protected, which I think by extension means a change in regime. And regime change really at this point, I think, is Canadian policy. We've had statements to that effect saying Canada will not negotiate with Iran until there's a change in regime. So I think that's got to be part of it. Part of it is our insistence that the military action be very precise and targeted, that civilians be spared. Regrettably, we've already seen some actions that have targeted civilians that have gone after Iranian infrastructure, which doesn't really belong to the Iranian regime. It belongs to all Iranian people. So we have to push for the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. And finally, I think there's a lot that Canada can do short of being militarily involved. I mean, I think there's technology we can send to the Iranian people. We can take in refugees, or at least provide mechanisms for those in need to receive assistance from us. So I think that can be our contribution. We don't necessarily need to, send bombs or military personnel to be involved in this conflict. Mm-hmm.
Now, you yourself are Iranian Canadian. And there has been statements made that the hope is that the Iranian people will take these strikes rather as an opportunity to stand up against what is left of the regime. Do you see that happening?
I see that happening under certain circumstances. I see that happening if the military strikes, as I mentioned, remain precise. I think if the U.S. or Israel bomb civilian infrastructure or bomb civilian housing or things along those lines, it will be very difficult to galvanize the people to come out in the streets. And I think if it's important that these bombings focus on the apparatus of repression. So be it the IRGC, Iran's intelligence ministry, Iran's propaganda networks, if those things are knocked out or sufficiently degraded, my belief is, based on everything I see on social media, based on conversations I have with Iranians, based on everything I know about the level of dissatisfaction and anger that exists in Iran, I think Iranians will come back out in the streets to take their country back.
Kaveh Shahrooz, I appreciate you speaking to us. Of course, we'll speak again as this conflict is far from over. But for this evening, thank you for the time.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
And of course, we will continue to follow the story out of Iran in the coming days and weeks. But right now, let's turn to some new polling numbers out today, released by Pollara Strategic Insights. The polling firm has found a double-digit lead for the governing Liberals among decided voters across the country. But also this, Pollara saying that if an election were held today, 40% of decided voters in the province of Alberta would cast a ballot for the Carney Liberals. That is a 12% increase from the percentage of Albertans who supported the party less than a year ago in the 2025 election. And Pollara says that could mean a number of seats flipping if and when Canadians go to the polls again. Well, with more on these numbers and what they could mean for the governing Liberals, we're now joined by Dan Arnold. Dan is the Chief Strategy Officer with Pollara Strategic Insights. Dan, good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Happy to be here. Nothing like more than talking about Alberta politics.
And numbers, and the numbers, which you love.
All that,
yeah, but listen, for people who don't know, obviously you also headed up research for Prime Minister Trudeau, all his 3 successful campaigns. So you as a Liberal, that hat on, when you look at these numbers in Alberta, when the next election comes, whenever that may be, fair to say that you're feeling optimistic?
Yeah, optimistic. I think it's fair to say, the Liberals right now are seeing a bit of a surge of support in Alberta. I wrote a Substack post where I kind of compared this to a Chinook in Alberta, which is kind of when the weather heats up and it gets really warm, which is what's happening now. The Liberal numbers are heating up, but sometimes a week later it's back to -30 after the Chinook comes in, right? So I think it might be short-lived, but polling I'm seeing, the polling that's out there in the media, would definitely have the Liberals at historic highs in Alberta right now. They haven't ever gotten over 30% in an election in the last 50 years in Alberta, but most polls have them over 30% in Alberta these days.
Yeah, and to your point, in terms of decided voters, like hitting 40, which, quite frankly, grabs attention whenever you cover politics in this country vis-a-vis Alberta and the Liberals. But I saw your Substack last week, and what also struck me was more than just the support you're tracking and others are tracking with the Liberals in the province. You also talk about the Liberals having a chance of winning as many as 12 seats. Now we boarded the top 10, and it's right there in front of us. What can you tell us? I mean, Edmonton Centre, Calgary Confederation, those are Liberal already, Eleanor Shevsky as well as Corey Hogan. But the rest, you see those?
Yeah, I think they're in play. Certainly at these numbers, and obviously if the numbers do subside a bit, then they're probably playing more in 4 or 5 seats. But if they're at high 30s in Alberta, or 40% in Alberta, yeah, definitely 12, 13 ridings could be in play. The thing about Alberta is, you look at Edmonton, in provincial elections, the NDP sweeps it every time, right? The NDP gets over 50%, well over 50% in every riding in Edmonton. So these are people who are progressive. Maybe in federal politics, they've got some stigmas with the Liberals in the past, but Mark Carney is a hometown boy from Edmonton. And I think he's talking like an Albertan. He's doing things like talking about pipelines and working with the government there. And I think, there's certainly a sense that he's one of us. And, that potential is there, I think, at least in those 6-7 Edmonton ridings. And then a couple Calgary seats as well, too, where they're always competitive, that certainly could be in play.
Yeah, might be in play. So is it the fact that they're viewing Mark Carney as speaking like an Albertan, being an Albertan? What is it that's driving this?
There's a couple things. I mean, look, the Liberal numbers are up a bit nationally everywhere. And I think there's the Trump, the Davos speech, and all those factors. Alberta's not that different from the rest of the country. They care about those same issues. But I think the unique thing in Alberta is, one, Carney is the hometown boy. And it's one thing just to wear an Oilers jersey every now and then. But the thing that matters, I think, is that he's actually making policy changes that seem like he gets Alberta, right? We talked about the memorandum of understanding he signed with Danielle Smith. He certainly has spent a lot of time showing Albertans that he's live to the issues they're facing. The other thing that I think is interesting right now is that everyone I talk to back in Alberta, my family's out there, so I visit, I talk to people there. The separatism debate is really starting to take over now. That's what people are talking about, Alberta separatism. There's probably a referendum happening this year. And I think as people start to focus a bit more on that issue, that may be having some bleed over into federal politics right now. The voter groups where the Liberals are growing the most in Alberta are immigrants, older Albertans, university-educated Albertans, and those are the groups that are also the most worried about separatism. So I think there might be something there that's having an impact that is very unique, obviously, to Alberta and not the rest of the country.
Yeah, unique, as you say. But, you reference it a little bit, and I do want to talk about the durability of this as well, because, we showed your Alberta numbers. Let's take a look at your national numbers, beginning with decided voters, because when you look at decided voters, you see a commanding lead for the Liberals there, double-digit over the Conservatives, and, near 50% for the government right now. But if you were to include all respondents, and that includes people who are undecided, well, the numbers do drop for the Liberals. So I'm wondering about the durability of this kind of trend, what you're observing. What can you say about that?
Yeah, the advice I always give people, and even though I'm a pollster, I shouldn't tell people don't put too much stock in the polls, because then I'd be out of business. but I think it's fair to say horse race polls between elections, don't put a lot of stock in them, because people are not, voters are not thinking day to day about who I'm going to vote for, and it's not something that is consuming them. During an election campaign, they actually are shopping around, they're comparing the options, they're maybe looking up some policies, they're exposed to ads. Like, it's a much more live environment where people are. Between elections, this is kind of background noise. So yeah, right now I think there's some background noise that moves them towards the Liberals. Maybe they're a little bit more worried about Trump than they were a couple months ago. Maybe they heard something about Mark Carney giving a big speech that was very, supportive of Canada's role in the world. And I think some of those factors might be pushing them a bit more to the Liberals. But yeah, like, you get into an election campaign, things can change very quickly. And I think, that's the Liberals, I think they'd have to be careful about trying to go to an election right now, because I think you could see things shift pretty quickly there.
Yeah, I've got 30 seconds, but I do have to ask about this, because there is that debate. Should the Liberals take advantage of this kind of polling lead, which, when you look at decided voters in your numbers, you can see some logic behind that. But when you dig deeper into the numbers, there are still big challenges for this government in terms of being seen to perform well, and in terms of affordability, in terms of jobs, in terms of the economy. So what do you say to that question as to whether or not the Liberals should pull the trigger right now and try to get another mandate?
It would be a risk. I think it'd be a lot easier to get a few more floor crossers and win some by-elections to get to the majority. But you're right. Like, we just put out a poll today with Pollara, and the majority of Canadians think the cost of living has gotten worse in the year since Mark Carney became Prime Minister, right? There's some structural problems there. And as you get into an election campaign, people start to focus on different things. Maybe today they're thinking about Trump, but 3 weeks from now they might not be. And I think there'd be a big risk if the Liberals went into a campaign.
Okay, Dan Arnold, always fascinating to talk with you. Thank you for this. Appreciate the time.
Anytime.
Well, before we leave you this evening, a quick note of a rally that did take place on Parliament Hill today, as representatives from Colorectal Cancer Canada traveled to the nation's capital to call on provincial and territorial governments to lower the age for routine screening of colorectal cancer. Right now, the age for regular screening starts at 50, but advocates for a change in the status quo say it should be done earlier, at the age of 45, not only to save the healthcare system money, but also to save Canadian lives.
I was told that my tumor was probably growing for 10 years. Imagine if the screening age had been lowered to 45 instead of 50. My tumor wouldn't have grown. It could have been caught as a polyp, and I would have had it removed, and I wouldn't be standing here as a person who had colon cancer.
And March, by the way, is Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month. Well, that is our program for this Tuesday evening. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.